court staff. 81% said the way the judge or magistrate handled their case was fair. That's a good number when you consider that half of them had to lose. That's how it works. We believe that measuring performance and then sharing those metrics with the public are key to improving performance in our service. I personally have invested a good deal of time into a few specific administrative projects that I want to tell you about as well. The first was in my intro, the limited English proficiency rule. In September, the court passed a comprehensive rule governing how courts across the state will handle people with limited English proficiency who come to court. The rule is designed to ensure that we're guaranteeing meaningful access to our courts everywhere in our state for those for whom English is difficult. For some counties, this rule was actually business as usual. There were some that were handling this problem quite well. But for others, it required a culture change, to be blunt. And I'm proud of the rule, and I'm proud of the court for taking the initiative to pass it. Implementing the rule has been one of my projects this year, and together with the help of a great committee, we have received plans from every single county in Michigan about how they're going to implement the rule in their courthouses. We have court forms translated into multiple languages. We're doing trainings around the state to all levels of court staff and outreach to communities where this new rule matters most. And I'm very happy with the progress we've made in just a matter of months. It feels not like a government pace. Which is good. I want to pivot here to one more topic that I have spent quite a lot of time on lately, and I care a lot about. So, and I still have the microphone, so you have to indulge me. This January, the Attorney General of the United States appointed me to the newly formed National Commission on Forensic Science. Please don't. It's not. I won't talk too much science, but it's very important work, and I want to try and capture why it's so important to me. So picture this for a moment, and I mean really try and imagine it in your mind's eye. A middle-aged man kneeling at a gravestone, tears streaming down his cheeks, his head bowed, his forehead leaning against the cold stone. In this almost surreal scene, the man's lawyers stand some distance behind him, uncomfortable, not knowing what to say or what to do for him, their client, who had just walked out of prison after more than a quarter century. For the first time in 27 years, he was visiting the grave of his wife and 2 baby daughters. Finally, the man stands up, he embraces his lawyers, I was one of them, and said that he really couldn't find the words to express his gratitude for the work they had done to win his release after 27 years. This happened. David Gavitt was the man standing at the grave of his family on that unforgettable day in June of 2012, having been sentenced in 1985 to life without chance of parole. The crime he was convicted of was murder, using gasoline to burn down his house and kill his family. The University of Michigan's Innocence Clinic took Mr. Gavitt's case in 2010, when a fresh look at the forensic evidence revealed quite simply this. In fact, there had been no gasoline, there was no arson, there was no murder. What had happened, we now know, was instead a terrible accident on a frigid March night. When I say we now know, I mean we now understand from scientific evidence that no arson started the fire that took Mr. Gavitt's family. Based upon a modern look at the forensic evidence, the prosecution's expert agreed, and to the prosecutor's great credit, he released Mr. Gavitt the very day he got that report. Mr. Gavitt spent 27 years in prison having lost his family because the criminal justice system erred. It failed him, and it failed all of us. Mr. Gavitt's story would be heartbreaking if it were the only one of its kind, but it's not. It is one of many instances of indisputably wrongful convictions that reflect ongoing challenges in the field of forensic science. But there is good news if you can measure good news by the ability to make progress, and I do. In fact, I'm hopeful, cautious, but hopeful, that we are on the verge of a revolution in criminal justice, and that revolution is a scientific one. That is, it involves importing into the criminal courtroom the best scientific methods, practices, and technologies. State-of-the-art forensic science is crucial to the administration of criminal justice, not just for avoiding wrongful convictions, important in itself, but also for strengthening law enforcement. When the best forensic science, with the best forensic science, cold cases can be solved. Hot cases can be solved with greater certainty. The criminal justice system can work more accurately and more efficiently. Nearly 10 years ago, the prestigious National Academy of Science was charged with creating a forensic science committee to assess resource needs, identify new technologies, disseminate best practices, and make recommendations to maximize the use of forensic technologies to solve crimes, and to increase the number of qualified forensic scientists and medical examiners available to work at public laboratories. The NAS's report was released in 2009, and frankly, it was a bombshell. While the committee hailed some advances in technology, especially regarding the use of DNA that have aided in the solving of crimes, it also raised a very serious alarm. While much has been made of the idea of junk science in civil litigation, the NAS report made crystal clear that junk science too often pervades the criminal courtroom too. By no means always, but too often, the criminal courtroom has not kept pace with scientific developments, and criminal adjudication has too often perverted the scientific method. To address these problems, the committee made a large set of ambitious and concrete recommendations. Among them was one important one. It recommended that Congress establish and fund a National Institute of Forensic Science, which would be an independent federal entity that would promote the development of forensic science into a mature field of data-driven multidisciplinary research. Congress didn't get to that. I think I talked about that earlier. But the president did. And in response to that NAS report recommendation, the president asked the Department of Justice, together with the National Institute of Science and Technology, to form the new National Commission on Forensic Science. Pairing these two is really exciting. You don't look as excited as I am, but the National Institute of Science and Technology is an agency within the Department of Commerce. And this is an exciting agency to have working on this problem. NIST, among other things, standardizes weights and measures. They were the agency that made sure a gallon was a gallon. This standardization was important to promote commerce, as buyers and sellers needed common units to promote trade. NIST, in other words, is a completely non-political, technical body. They already do some forensics, but the point of combining NIST with DOJ is to bring scientific precision to the methods and techniques of criminal adjudication too. It's an exciting process. The commission involves federal, state, local forensic science service providers, research scientists, academics, law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges. And we're actively at work looking for policy recommendations to the Attorney General. I can't speak for the commission. They tell me that every single time they communicate with me. You can't speak for the commission, so I'm not. But it's my great honor to be part of it, and I'm confident that its work is going to help to promote scientific integrity in our courtrooms. Ultimately, of course, this responsibility falls to lawyers and to judges. We control our courtrooms, and we can insist on reliability and standardization and, frankly, science in our forensic science. And when we do, that's what we'll get. I am very grateful to be able to say I have the support of all of my colleagues and my Chief Justice in particular as I spend many hours on this project, not just in Michigan, but also in DC, that I care so much about. So back to my reflections. I want to say that on a personal level, I have been supported and listened to by each of my colleagues. I think they would each say that at times I have convinced them and persuaded them of something. And at other times, they have persuaded me. I believe that our collective process works, that the founding fathers kind of got this multi-member court thing right. We get to better solutions, better results, when we all bring our different perspectives to bear on the questions before us, and we do so collegially and productively. And when we disagree, we need to do it agreeably, and generally, we don't disagree. Our conference discussions, I believe, would make you proud of your third branch of government. At least that's my view, 16 months on the court. Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight, and thank you for your warm welcome. I appreciate it.
for your very excellent and informative talk. Really enjoyed it. But I have I have a question. I was in Lansing, and it was during jury selection for the first murder trial that used DNA technology. And because I had a lab at Michigan State where we worked with DNA and RNA, it was probably 1988, give or take, maybe 1990. I was dismissed for cause because I knew too much. That strikes me as ridiculous. Could you please give your opinion about maybe what has changed? Thank you.
Well, so your question is about whether it makes sense to dismiss a juror for cause because he or she knows too much, and I'm with you on this one. I like jurors who know a lot. I would prefer decision makers who are informed, educated, and engaged. The criminal process does permit each side to use peremptory challenges, and so one side could challenge you just because they feel like it, basically, and that is an important. I think that's an important part of making each side feel like they had a fair process. But if you're saying that you were literally excused for cause, that is a legal decision I can't get my head around, and that makes me mad.
Makes me mad too.
Without minimizing the importance of the courts dealing with criminal docket, I'm curious what percentage of the cases you hear involve civil law and the creation of precedent that can guide business and commercial activity.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think I can answer it now. And the great majority of the cases that come to the court are criminal. And the reason for that is every criminal defendant can appeal it all the way to the Supreme Court, and it has a right to a lawyer through the Court of Appeals, and often a assigned lawyer will do the Supreme Court brief for them as well. And if not, and they're in prison, they usually have the time to work on a brief. So it's not going to cost them anything. So the great majority of the applications we get and review every month are criminal. I would say 70, 75%, maybe even slightly higher. Now, that doesn't mean that number translates to the percentage of cases we end up deciding. I would say that of the cases we issue an opinion or an order or a decision in, it's closer to 50-50, civil, criminal, and maybe even slightly more civil. The truth is, though, in my view, a court certainly has a responsibility to provide predictability and stability and rules that businesses and markets can price contracts based on and make decisions going forward. That's also true, however, of families, parents, children, family law cases, and frankly, police officers and prosecutors. So I believe the same principles that make for a good court with respect to the business community and the consumer community, both sides of that community, frankly, are true in the other areas of law that we deal with. But that's the numbers answer. It's got to be roughly right, I think. Yes, sir.
My question is regarding restorative justice, and most people maybe don't know what that is, but basically it's where the person who's convicted makes amends to the person they've harmed and then tries to make them whole in some way or another. My understanding is that it's much better in terms of reducing recidivism, and I'd like to know what your opinion of it was and what you can do as a Supreme Court justice, if you're in favor of that too.
Yeah, the question is about restorative justice, which is a big term, but an important term that implies some kind of action on behalf of the defendant in a criminal case to take responsibility, usually directly with the person who's harmed, and sometimes the people who were harmed as a result. You might not have realized that by stealing that car, that grandpa couldn't drive his grandkids to school, and the kids didn't go to school for a week. So there are some actual restorative justice programs that trial courts are running right now, where they have him basically apologize to, not just apologize, but sit down with and understand and hear from all of the victims of his criminal activity. This is somewhat anecdotal, but from the experiments that are going on around the state in restorative justice, it does look pretty it does look like the results are better than a traditional docket. So there's a program I know about in Detroit. There's a brand new one in Washtenaw County that it's for juveniles. It's a peacemaking court, actually. It's based on Native American principles. It's similar, though. And my understanding is they've been very successful, and our court has funded all of these projects. So I think that funding it's the same way that the specialty courts, the veterans courts, the mental health courts, and the drug courts were funded originally without any data to be able to show that they were going to help. Well, we now have the data. You know, it's not a bad way to stepwise move into a new way of doing business, because, you know, in those programs we now have excellent data to show that they make a difference. Not just in recidivism, but they end up saving you money. You know, when somebody doesn't come back to court as many times, it actually saves the court and the county money. So, yes, I like it.
I have a question.
Yes?
How have you, as a woman, managed the family and the professional thing?
Yeah.
And how do you mentor young women? What are you telling them about that issue?
That's a whole other speech. I like that speech, though. The truth is, I have a lot of complicated answers to this question. How do you manage like family and work, and what do you tell young women about how to do that? I have a pretty active family. I have these like 4 active teenagers. One of my kids is the captain of 2 varsity sports next year, and they all play in the orchestra. They all, you know, have jobs. They all do a gazillion things. My husband leaves all week and goes to Washington. Where are my kids right now? You're probably wondering. But the truth is, I mean, I have to say, I think my husband and I really have just incorporated our kids into our work, maybe a lot more than not everybody can do that. So when I was running for statewide office, that was quite a project. We made it a family project. They phone banked, they went door to door, they weren't always good at it, especially the 2 that packed the donuts. Like we caught them in the phone banking having a contest for how long they could keep one person on the phone. Not the idea of a phone bank. Right? They were like, you know, one of them had somebody on for like an hour. Not useful at all. But you know, we made it a family project. I will say that at the end of the campaign, literally the day after, we went for a family walk, all 6 of us, which we make them leave their phones and actually walk and talk to us. They hate it, or they claim they do. I don't know if they really do, but they complain about it. And we were walking, and my husband said, like, what's the single thing you learned most from this campaign? What was your biggest lesson from the campaign? And the unanimity and the strength of their response was stunning. They said, we learned how to mooch rides from other people. So, you know, I also relied on other people a lot. And I think it takes that. I mean, I think when you have 2 parents working, and so do the people next door, and so do the people next door, if we don't like lock arms and figure out how to get this stuff done together, then it's not going to get done as well. But when we do lock arms and figure out how to work together in our neighborhoods and in our communities and in our schools, I think we can all rest easier. So I have a whole lot more I can say about that. It's a challenge, but I don't think that, I really hope for young women lawyers and young women, any professionals, that they keep trying to figure out ways to do all of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes?
Yeah. In your remarks, you talked about the nonpartisan nature of the Michigan Supreme Court and how much you worked together and how you issued all these unanimous decisions this year. I think there are a lot of us who are beginning to think that that may not be so true of our U.S. Supreme Court, and that cases like Bush v. Gore and Citizens United have sort of made us think that maybe they're just way too partisan. And what's your take on that?
Please repeat the question.
Yeah, the question was, is the U.S. Supreme Court as nonpartisan as maybe it could be or should be, or is there some evidence that the U.S. Supreme Court is making decisions in a more partisan way? And obviously, the big 5-4 cases that you hear about would make you have that concern. I should say there have been a number of cases the U.S. Supreme Court has issued even this term. One environmental case recently that was 7-2. So I don't think all of the evidence, I don't think it's always, you know, you're always hoping Justice Kennedy falls on your side. It's not quite that simple, although I would put Justice Kennedy's picture on the cover of my brief if I was arguing there. But no, I don't think it's, I think that there is more made of it than is actually true. If you examine their opinions, I think that the great majority of theirs are unanimous as well. It is the hard cases where you're going to see the partisan splits. And Richard Posner wrote a really interesting book about this question, about the federal courts, and he crunched a bunch of data to do it. It's literally like Moneyball for judges. It's really interesting, and he examined every level. It's all federal, so it's not. It can't prove me wrong in the state court, but his data does show that the higher level the court, the more likely it is to act politically or in a partisan way. I'm not, you know, it's a pretty empirical study, so I think there's nothing to it. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's a really interesting book that Posner did just last year on this topic. So to the extent you feel that way, you're apparently not alone, and there are some scholars who share that view. I think that it's a little bit more complicated than the few big picture cases you hear about. There are other cases that you might expect to be decided in a partisan way and they're not, and then nobody covers it, you know. So I think it's a little more complicated than the view that you might have, yeah.
Well, since we're talking about the federal Supreme Court, I've always been, I'm an old engineer, so I'm not a lawyer. So many of these crucial ones are decided 5-4, and all these justices are looking at the same Constitution. And most of them all went to Yale Law School, I believe. And at least 6 of them are Catholics. And that they come out 5-4. And I just have a hard time rationalizing that.
Well, I don't, you know, the truth is, like, the only cases that make it to the Supreme Court, even the Michigan Supreme Court, are the cases where there are hard questions, you know, and it's not, even though a judge's job is to call balls and strikes to the extent it's clear that something is a ball or a strike, as you well know, sometimes it's not really clear if it's a ball or a strike. So I am not of the view that reasonably, that two different people who are both committed to trying to figure out the right answer might come to different answers, but not for political reasons. They literally can view the question differently. I mean, we will have cases coming out in the next few weeks that are not unanimous cases. The opinions happen not to be divided along partisan lines, but we genuinely disagree about what the legal answer is. And frankly, in the cases where I'm on one side of it, I see the other side. I don't think I don't think they're crazy. I think I'm more right. Yes, sir.
I haven't lived in Michigan that long. I've been here about 9 years, and I practiced law over in Minnesota for most of my career. And just in reading the paper, you know, casual knowledge, at least 3, 4, 5 years ago, I had the sense from certain cases that were reported that there were a lot of decisions, some that offended me, obviously, or I wouldn't remember them, that they really were based, you could follow. It was partisan decision. And I'm wondering, I mean, I'm delighted to hear your description of the court that you've experienced, but do you think there's been a change in the court?
Well, remember, I've only served on the court for 16 months. Right. And remember, I mean, or don't remember, but let me tell you that of the 7 of us now on the court, 4 of the 7 have been there 3 years or fewer. So this is a different court. It's a court with, we call ourselves the youthful majority. And you know, when you have that kind of turnover, you have opportunities for doing things in a different way. That's not to say I don't want to therefore confirm, you know, your view that the court was, you know, acting in partisan and political ways before. I will say that I know that those were the reports. You know, I read the front page of the New York Times too. And I used to practice in the court, but I can certainly report happily that I see none of that right now. So that's, you know, that's the only part I really know well, and frankly, that's the part that matters for today. So, I mean, I sit across the table with colleagues who were nominated by a different party than I was nominated by. We agree a lot more than we disagree, and when we disagree, they almost always say, like, you make a really good point, I'm going to think about it. You know, that's all you want, right? That's kind of what you want from a court. That's all I want from a court.
Transparency in funding judicial elections has been quite a hot topic, also known as dark money. Would you please speak to that, your view?
Yeah, that's another speech as well. I mean, but it's one I care a great deal about. I mean, I actually have now twice taught a seminar at law school on judicial elections, and a big part of it is funding. I mean, the complaint is a fair one. I mean, the complaint is, let me put it in real terms for you, in terms of the election I went through. In 2012, it was a big election. There were 3 seats in play. So there were 3 nominees from the Democratic Party, 3 from the Republican Party. There were some minor party candidates as well. But $18 million was spent on that election. Now, the candidate committees, the major party candidate committees, the 6 of us from the Democratic and Republican parties, I think our candidate committee spent was $4 million. That's it. The rest of that money, the other $14 million, was spent by the parties, equally, frankly, on both sides. And nobody knows who the big funders were and who the big, I mean, we all think we know, but we don't really know, because it's not reported, who the big funders were of those campaigns. Now, those campaigns were like shadow campaigns. I mean, they were, you know, I'm out there like running my own campaign, telling people who I am, trying to tell you why you might think I might be a good addition to the Michigan Supreme Court. And meanwhile, my own party is running these ads that they were calling me like a family advocate or something. My husband saw one of the ads. He was like, I don't think I can vote for you, honey, because I kind of want like lawyers on my court, not workers. I mean, you know, this is a critique of my own side. You know, I don't know who's funding the ads. I have no control over the ads. The same, I'm sure, is true of my colleagues on the other side. They probably felt the same way. The big problem for the public, in my view, is that it makes the court look bought and sold, even if, you know, you get to meet me and I can tell you it's not. Like, the good news is it actually is not bought and sold. These are 7 people sitting around a table doing exactly the job they swore they were there to do, and often probably disappointing the people who probably funded those ad campaigns. That's the good news. The bad news is I can only talk to 100 people on a Thursday night, so a lot of the public will feel like the court is bought and sold based on a system where $14 million can be spent and the donors are never disclosed. So for no other reason than the public confidence in this institution I love so much, I wish we could have a different system, at least for judicial elections. I sort of feel like in the other branches, you know, when you elect a new Congress, you do that because you want change. You know, you want a new set of policies. You know, the court is different. Like, you want people who are there to make unpopular decisions, even for their friends, when that's what the rule of law requires. And so I have this working theory that I haven't been able to like write up yet. That there should be it should be palatable to have a different set of rules, at least in judicial elections, than others. I mean, again, the good news is the court is certainly not bought and sold, but the bad news is probably a lot of people who aren't here tonight might think so. Yes?
How would we keep up with the workings of the Supreme Court here?
That's a great question. How would we keep up with the workings of the Supreme Court? So the opinions that are issued are on the website. So you can see all of the work product we do in our decision-making function, as well as the orders. We issue orders constantly, every day. So if you're actually, like, if at that kind of time, you can look at our order list every day. The opinions are more interesting. The administrative work is somewhat harder. I mean, the limited English proficiency work, we do have a web page. I made the court create a web page so that the local courts could have access to our materials easier and faster. But some of the other administrative work we do is harder to see. I mean, we try and push it out to the media because we actually think the public has a right to know. But it turns out when that story is like, hey, look what we're doing really well, nobody cares. They prefer a story that, like, we're fighting or things are not going well. So, yeah. Any other questions? Nope. Thank you.
Thank you so much.